Hello, my name is Henry Silverman, and today I would like to address inequities. What are they, and how can a concept of social justice address these inequities? Discussion about inequities are important if we remember our definition of public health as shown in this slide. Essentially, public health ensures the conditions in which people can be healthy. As we will see, social, economic, and political inequities lead to differences in health. Regarding inequalities in health, what are the factors leading to such inequalities? Well, here is a slide showing the numerous factors leading to health inequalities. We have genetics, gender differences, individual choice, intelligence, differences in physical status, differences in environmental factors and climate, communication barriers, and the list goes on. For those who are visual learners, here's a slide showing the estimation of the percent contribution to health inequalities from various factors. We have access to healthcare, individual behaviors, culture, the environment, racism, poverty, genes, all contribute to health inequalities. When talking about inequities, there are two types of questions to ask. One involves social scientific questions, which address the extent of inequalities and the factors that are causally responsible for these inequalities. Alternatively, one could ask normative questions. For example, which inequalities should we care about and which ones are unjust? So what is the difference between inequalities and inequities? What is the distinction? An inequality represents a disparity or a difference in rates of health and disease. No moral judgment about the existing inequalities. An inequity, however, is an inequality that is unjust, and hence one is making a moral value judgment on the cause of the difference. Hence, when we talk about an inequity, we're talking about an inequality that is unjust. Are these examples of health inequalities or health inequities? For example, increased rates of sickle cell anemia in African Americans, increased cystic fibrosis in Caucasians, increased breast cancer in women, increased prostate cancer in men, or difference in the rates of premature births between different ethnicities. This slide shows a difference in the rates of premature birth between 1989 and 1997, stratified according to the different ethnicities. This slide shows a difference in obesity rates in women, stratified between whites, blacks, and Mexicans. And this slide shows a difference in life expectancies in the last century between Caucasians and African Americans. So what are inequities? If there is a difference in the rate of disease between groups, there is an inequality in health between those groups. The question we must then ask is, why does this difference exist? Cases of health inequalities due to genetic differences, such as sickle cell and cystic fibrosis, and biological differences, such as what we see in breast cancer in women and prostate cancer in men, are unavoidable, and hence such differences are not unjust. However, other inequalities due to social, economic, political factors might be unjust. Inequities refers to the avoidable, unequal provision of resources which result from discriminatory or structural differences in social or political status, gender, economic level, ethnicity, or cultural status. Achieving equity involves removing unjust differences between groups of people that are caused by the unequal provisions of resources that are necessary for health. Achieving equity involves righting the injustices represented by poorer health conditions among the disadvantaged. Equity is the absence of systematic disparities in health between groups with different levels of underlying social advantage. Hence, an inequity by definition represents an unfair inequality. Why address inequities? Well, inequities are unfair. Such inequalities are avoidable. Interventions to reduce health inequalities are cost-effective, and inequities affect everyone and therefore overall population health. Now, which of the following provides the best justification for addressing inequities, the unfair distribution of social and material goods, in a population? One could say that one should address inequities from duties of beneficence, mutual benefit, which is essentially enlightened self-interest, or one should address inequities based on claims of justice. Regarding duties of beneficence, one may address the inequities based on such a concept, but duties of beneficence are not obligatory. Addressing inequities based on mutual benefit or self-interest may not completely address the inequalities. However, if addressing the inequalities is based on the claims of justice, then this is something that we are obligated to do based on previous injustices. One should address the inequalities based on claims of justice because the present inequities are due to unjust social institutions that cause the inequalities. So what is social justice? Social justice is concerned with human well-being. Social institutions are designed to enable persons to be more likely to exercise their capabilities to achieve a concept of the good. The question is how to distribute the fundamental primary goods. Or in other words, which theory of justice should be used to distribute the necessary goods that enable people to lead their concept of a good. So which theories of justice should we use? Well, we have several noted in this slide. We have utilitarian theories of justice, egalitarian, and libertarian justice. All three attempt to explain what would make a distribution just. Well, regarding utilitarian justice, regarding utilitarian justice, one would distribute the primary goods so that in the final outcome, one would have the greatest good for the greatest number of people. John Stuart Mill was one of the founders of utilitarianism. Utilitarian justice seeks to maximize the aggregate well-being of society as a whole. Some problems with utilitarian justice involves, well, how does one define aggregate good? Should it be based on happiness, pleasure, other measures? Also, the principle of utility is open to the objection that it may sacrifice the rights of the minority for the sake of the happiness of the majority. Alternatively, we have libertarian justice. This is emphasis on individual liberty. It seeks procedural justice based on a free market, and it asks the question, how did the inequalities emerge? If the inequalities emerge under fair rules, then the outcome is just. Then we have egalitarian justice. The basic principle here is that all persons have equal moral claim to treatment. Every person should have the same level of material goods and services. For indivisible goods, like organ transplants, one should have equal chances at the scarce interventions. One way to achieve egalitarian justice is by the use of a lottery. However, there are some problems with a lottery. For example, a lottery is blind to morally relevant factors, and it's somewhat random. Alternatively, one could have a principle of first come, first serve, for example, based on the waiting list. However, a waiting list favors those who are well-informed, well-connected, and well-off. Alternatively, one could look at the concept of a qualified egalitarianism. Such egalitarianism does not aim at strict equality, but only at equality of opportunity. Opportunities of what? Fair equality of opportunity will only appear as fair if it really enables people to exercise their liberty. According to this criterion, people must be enabled to live an integral, self-responsible life in order to enhance their health. An example of a qualified egalitarian is exemplified by John Rawls' theory of justice. According to John Rawls, justice is the first virtue of social institutions. His theory consists of two principles. The first principle is that each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive total system of equal basic liberties compatible with a similar system of liberty for all. Second, social and economic inequalities could exist, but they need to satisfy two conditions. One, they must be attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. In other words, access to privileged positions cannot be blocked by discrimination according to irrelevant criteria. And then social and economic inequalities can exist, but they must be to the greatest benefit of the least advantage, the so-called difference principles. The difference principle means that all social goods ought to be distributed equally unless an unequal distribution would be to everyone's advantage and to the greatest advantage to the disadvantage. Rawls' primary goods includes rights, liberties, and opportunities, income and wealth, and a social basis of self-respect. According to the difference principle, if a system of strict equality maximizes the absolute position of the least advantaged in society, then the difference principle advocates strict equality. However, if it is possible to raise the position of the least advantaged further by inequality of income and wealth, then the difference principle prescribes inequality up to that point where the absolute position of the least advantaged can no longer be raised. Rawls' principles of justice regulate the key social determinants of health. The first principle assures equal basic liberties. For example, it guarantees effective rights of political participation. Fair equality of opportunity principle assures access to high-quality education, early childhood interventions, etc., aimed at eliminating class or race disadvantages. And then finally, Rawls' difference principle permits inequalities in income only if the inequalities work to make those who are worst off as well off as possible. Now, there are several critics of the difference principle. For example, Utilitarian says that it doesn't maximize utility. Libertarians would say it infringes on liberty through taxation. Merit-based theorists argue one needs to reward hard work even when it doesn't help the disadvantaged. And finally, it doesn't provide sufficient rewards for ambition. The rebuttal to all this is that social harmony is indispensable in maintaining a given social order. Another criticism involves Rawls' set of primary goods. Essentially, his theory of justice just involves the distribution of primary goods. His theory of justice is not directly concerned with the realization of human well-being under any description. His theory of justice is concerned only with how the basic structure of society distributes certain primary goods to satisfy competing conceptions of the good, a so-called thin conception of the good. His primary goods again involves rights, liberties, and opportunities, income and wealth, and a social basis of self-respect. According to Amartya Sen, what matters is what people can actually do with the primary goods. One must then be concerned with the necessary freedoms for development, the freedoms necessary to use the primary goods in order to achieve human development. This slide shows the so-called conversion factor of capabilities. Essentially, one has primary goods, but one should be able to convert these primary goods into a concept of well-being. Capabilities involves the freedoms to achieve. It involves removing the obstacles to what a person can be and do. These barriers involve illiteracy, ill health, lack of access to resources, or lack of civil and political freedoms. Capabilities lead to what has been called functionings, the various things a person may value doing or becoming. Amartya Sen's concept of development as freedom was the basis of the Human Development Index in the early 1990s. The Human Development Index combines three dimensions: life expectancy at birth, knowledge and education, and standard of living. This Human Development Index was used to compare the human development between different countries. Since the 1990s, more sophisticated human development indices have been created to determine more accurately the human development of countries. We have one example in this slide, the so-called gender dimensions of human development. In the top part of the slide, we see that the human development of countries are measured by how well life expectancy is equally distributed between male and female, how well knowledge or education is equally distributed between males and females, and how a decent standard of living is equally distributed among the gender. On the bottom of the slide, we have what's called a gender empowerment measure. Essentially, one wants to determine whether power between the genders are equally distributed. One way to measure such empowerment between the genders is to look at how well political participation and decision-making is distributed between the gender, or how well males and females are able to participate in the economies, and how well power is shared over the economic resources. Countries with higher human development indices could be said to have a more robust concept of social justice. Thank you very much.